Hi everyone, this is Real on Paper. Today we will be continuing the ink swatching series with the third selection of green fountain pen inks. Most of these inks range anywhere from a cool tone green to an almost steel. There's some shaders, some sheeners, some shimmer, and even a scented ink. As always, I'll be using a glass of water, my Pilot Iro Uchishi dip pen in fine, my makeshift sample vial holder, and an old towel. I'll be swatching on 52 GSM Tomoe River paper. And with all of that said, let's get swatching. The first ink is Diamine Emerald. While Diamine Emerald is definitely a more cool toned green, its base color does not yet show hints of blue. However, the shading on this one does lean towards blue, especially on Tomoe River paper. It has no sheen, which actually seems to be relatively uncommon for today's inks. Then we have Diamine Golden Ivy. Like Emerald, Golden Ivy is on the cooler side, without having strong undertones of blue. The shading, however, leans a bit more blue. Unlike Emerald, Golden Ivy has a lot more going on. The ink has a bit of red sheen, and it has gold shimmer. In writing, you won't see too much of the sheen and shading, but the shimmer shows up nicely. I think this ink is very well behaved for a shimmer ink. Next up, we have another Diamine ink, this time from the 2022 Green Inkvent calendar, and that is Diamine Spruce. Spruce is a scented ink. It's a dark, cool-toned green with quite a bit of red sheen, at least on Tomoe River paper. Scented inks are a bit of a polarizing category, but personally I love this scent. It's definitely sprucey, albeit a bit artificial. This ink, however, is not well behaved. It bleeds and feathers like crazy, so I don't see myself using this in anything else than an extra fine nib. Ferris Wheel Press Spruce County Post is not just a very long name, but it's a very pretty ink as well. It's a cool green, a bit more on the unsaturated side. It has a tiny bit of sheen, but only in really big wet swatches. The ink is a bit on the drier side, like a lot of Ferris Wheel Press inks. Next up we have Diamine Black Ivy. Black Ivy was introduced in the 2021 Red Inkvent calendar. And let's be honest, this is not an ink that you pick for its base color. Why? Because you can barely see it next to the crazy amount of reddish purplish sheen. Even in writing, this ink displays a lot of sheen. While I personally find this amount of sheen a little overpowering, it does look very impressive. Then we have Sailor Miruai. Miruai is part of the Shikiori ink line and is inspired by seaweed. It looks a lot like Diamine Black Ivy. Miruai also has a ton of sheen, but the sheen is a little less red and leans more towards black. The ink also reveals a bit more of its base color than Black Ivy does, especially in writing. It's a pretty dark, cool green, almost teal. Jacques Herbin Vert Atlantide was created to celebrate the 350th anniversary of the Jacques Herbin brand. I read that its color draws on the greenery of the fabled city of Atlantis before it was lost to the deep. It's a dark, cool-toned green with a combination of silver and gold shimmer. I think this combination gives the ink a wonderfully elegant touch, especially because the shimmer is quite subtle. The next ink is also from Herbin, namely J. Herbin Vert Métropolitain or Métro Parisien. A color inspired by the classic Art Nouveau entrances of the Parisian subway stations created by Hector Guimard. Vert Métropolitain is part of the Paris line of inks. It's a saturated, medium cool-toned green with the tiniest rim of sheen. Then we have Robert Oster Peppermint. Peppermint is even cooler, slightly more blue than the last couple of inks. It's a very well behaved ink with a nice bit of shading and a not too overpowering amount of dark pinkish sheen. Next up, we have Rohrer and Klingner's Smaragdgrün, or Emerald Green. Compared to Diamine Emerald, this ink is a bit more blue leaning. Then again, there are many different types of emerald gemstones. It is a bit of a wetter writing ink, but still well behaved. And like Peppermint, it has a nice amount of dark pinkish sheen. The next ink is Diamine Velvet Emerald. Velvet Emerald was introduced in last year's Purple Ink Fan calendar. It's quite different from Diamine Emerald, the first ink I swatched today. It's a lot more blue leaning, and unlike Emerald, Velvet Emerald has a nice bit of sheen. It's that same dark pinkish color sheen as R&K's Emerald Green and Robert Oster's Peppermint. Then we have Robert Oster Sydney Darling Harbour. Sydney Darling Harbour also leans towards blue, but it looks very different compared to our last couple of inks because it's quite unsaturated. The ink shades nicely, and I think the colour is really quite unique. Next up is Inkebara Sea Green. Sea green looks like a mix of green, blue and grey, which I quite like. It's this category where, compared to other greens, it looks blue, but put it next to a couple of blues and it suddenly looks very green. Overall, I think it's still a green, and not just because it's literally called sea green. It's worth noting that this ink is on the drier side and would benefit from a broader nib or a wetter writing pen. The last ink for today is a bit of an outlier. I think Sailor Ink Studio number 160 can be put either with the green inks or the blue inks. It's a pale pastel color with quite a bit of shading. For some, this ink can be a little difficult to read as it's on the lighter side. While it is a unique color in my collection, I don't particularly love the color. It is, however, a very well behaved ink with a good flow. And that's it, another 14 green inks. From these colors, I find it hard to pick a favorite. I love the mixed shimmer in Jacques Herbin's Vert Atlantide, but I also enjoy the smooth, saturated Diamine Velvet Emerald and the moody Inkebara Sea Green. Enjoy this little recording of the page now that all the inks have dried completely and you can really see all the shading, the sheen and the shimmer. There will be one more video with green inks and then it's time to dive into an ocean of blue inks. I hope you enjoyed this video and I would love to hear what your favorite green ink is. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss the rest of the series, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care. Bye!